He was walking along the narrow trail, the cool mountain air brushing against his skin. A peaceful afternoon hike with the woman he loved. Then in an instant, everything changed. Nathan's foot twisted on a loose rock. Before he could react, he was at the edge, his body slipping.
Emily, help me! Pull me up!
I'm trying!
Nathan's breath hitched as he felt her grip loosen. A pause. A single heartbeat of silence. And he fell. The small plane touched down on the narrow runway, its wheels bouncing slightly against the rough tarmac. Outside the window, a vast expanse of green stretched toward the misty peaks in the distance. It was breathtaking, serene, untouched. A place meant for escape. Emily stepped off the plane first, the cool mountain air brushing against her skin. It was refreshing, crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Nathan followed closely behind, his face lighting up with excitement. "Smell that," he said, taking a deep breath. "That's real air. None of that city pollution." Emily forced a small smile. "Yeah, it's nice." Nathan slung his backpack over his shoulder, grinning. "This is exactly what we needed. A break from everything. A break. That's what they kept calling it. A much-needed retreat. Time away from the noise, the stress, the disappointments." But while Nathan saw this as a chance to unwind, Emily saw it as something else entirely. They made their way through the tiny airport, barely more than a wooden structure with a single counter. A man stood outside, holding a sign with their names. Their driver. The cab ride to the cabin was quiet, save for Nathan's enthusiasm filling the space. "There's this incredible hiking trail just a mile from our cabin," he said, scrolling through his phone. "Takes you right up to the cliffs, overlooking the whole valley. The view's supposed to be unreal." Emily stared out the window, watching the dense forest blur past. "Sounds nice." Nathan chuckled. "You're gonna love it, Em. Trust me." She turned to him, smiling softly. "I trust you." The road twisted through the mountains, climbing higher and higher until the town below was nothing more than a scattering of distant rooftops. An hour later, they arrived at their cabin, a secluded wooden lodge tucked between towering evergreens. It was beautiful, almost too perfect. "This is it," Nathan said, stepping out of the car. "Home for the week." Emily followed, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. The silence up here was different. It wasn't just quiet, it was absolute. No distant sirens, no honking cars. Just the rustling leaves and the occasional chirp of birds hidden within the trees. Nathan unlocked the cabin door, pushing it open with a dramatic flourish. "Welcome to paradise." Inside, the space was cozy. A stone fireplace sat at the center, a plush couch facing it. Wooden beams stretched across the ceiling, and large windows revealed a stunning view of the mountains beyond. Emily wandered inside, running her fingers along the edge of the dining table. It felt untouched, like no one had been here in a long time. "I'll get the fire going," Nathan said, already unpacking the logs near the fireplace. "And then wine." She nodded. "Wine sounds perfect." As the evening settled in, the cabin filled with the soft glow of the fire, the gentle clinking of glasses, the occasional burst of laughter. Nathan talked about their plans: hiking, exploring the town, maybe even renting a canoe. He was so full of life, so eager. Emily listened, her lips curved in a smile, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. She laughed at the right moments, nodded when he spoke, leaned into his warmth as they sat together. But behind her smile, something else was brewing. Something dark. Something final. The next morning's sun spilled through the cabin's large windows, casting golden streaks across the wooden floors. Emily stirred beneath the thick blankets, the lingering warmth of sleep still wrapped around her. Beside her, Nathan was already awake, stretching his arms with a contented sigh. "Morning, sleepyhead." He pressed a quick kiss to her forehead. "I was thinking, breakfast in town?" Emily nodded, pushing herself upright. "Sounds nice." Half an hour later, they were strolling through the heart of the small mountain town. It was quaint, almost frozen in time, with its cobblestone streets and old-fashioned storefronts. A cozy cafe sat at the corner, its windows fogged up from the warmth inside. Across the street, a farmer's market bustled with locals, their voices mingling in the crisp morning air. "Coffee first," Nathan declared, steering her toward the cafe. Inside, the scent of fresh pastries and roasted beans wrapped around them. They found a seat by the window, sipping on lattes as they watched the world move outside. Nathan talked about the cabin, about the hike they'd take later, about how nice it was to just be away from everything. Emily listened, nodding when she needed to, but her mind was elsewhere. After finishing their drinks, they wandered toward the market. Stalls lined the streets, filled with handmade crafts, fresh produce, jars of honey. Nathan was drawn to a booth selling local jams, already picking up different flavors, chatting with the vendor. Emily let him be. Her gaze had drifted elsewhere. Across the street, in a small park, a group of children played, chasing each other, their laughter ringing through the air like music. A little girl with curly blonde hair clung to her mother's hand, her tiny fingers gripping tight as she pointed excitedly at something in the distance. A boy no older than 4 stumbled as he ran, only to be scooped up by his father, who lifted him high into the air, making him giggle. Emily stood frozen. The sounds, the tiny hands, the pure, unfiltered joy on their faces, it stirred something deep within her. An ache, raw and consuming. For a moment, she imagined it. A small hand in hers. A soft voice calling her name. The weight of a child against her chest as she rocked them to sleep. The image was so vivid, so painfully real, that it almost stole her breath. Her fingers twitched at her sides. She could almost feel it. The life she wanted. The life she was supposed to have. Nathan's voice cut through the haze. She blinked, the vision shattering like glass. He was standing beside her now, a bag in his hand, his brow furrowed. "You okay?" Emily forced a smile. "Yeah, just zoned out." Nathan chuckled, nudging her playfully. "Come on, daydreamer. Let's head back." She followed him, slipping her hand into his. But something inside her had shifted. And there was no going back. The afternoon sun hung high above the treetops, casting golden beams through the dense forest. The mountain trail wound steeply ahead, cutting through towering pines and moss-covered rocks. The air smelled of earth and pine needles, crisp and untouched. Nathan led the way, his energy boundless. "This is incredible," he said, pausing to take in the view. "You don't get air like this in the city." Emily trailed behind him, her steps slower, her mind elsewhere. The morning lingered in her thoughts, the children in the park, their laughter echoing in her ears. The image of a small hand in hers, the warmth of a child's embrace. It was as if something had cracked open inside her, revealing an emptiness she could no longer ignore. Nathan kept talking, pointing out birds, rock formations, distant valleys stretching beyond the horizon. Emily nodded when she needed to, but she wasn't listening. She was thinking about her life, about her future, about the years slipping by, and the one thing she wanted most. They climbed higher, the trees thinning as they reached a plateau. A secluded spot, untouched and quiet, with a sheer drop on the other side leading down to jagged rocks below. The wind rustled through the leaves, whispering through the trees. Nathan exhaled, hands on his hips. "Damn, this is beautiful." He turned to Emily, grinning. "See? Worth the hike." She smiled faintly, but her heart pounded. Nathan stepped closer to the edge, peering down at the valley below. "You can see everything from up here." He turned back toward her. "Come take a look." Emily moved forward slowly. Nathan turned again, adjusting his footing on the uneven ground. His boot slipped slightly on loose gravel. He stumbled. For a split second, his arms flailed. Emily's breath caught. Then he was falling. His body lurched forward, gravity pulling him down. His hands reached out, grasping at nothing. The world seemed to slow as his form tumbled, hitting rocks, his body twisting unnaturally before vanishing into the abyss below. Then silence. A heavy, sickening silence. Emily stood motionless, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. She stepped forward, peering down. Nathan's body lay crumpled at the bottom of the rocky slope, motionless. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Still, she stood there, watching. Something inside her whispered that this moment had been coming for a long time. The wind howled through the trees. Finally, she screamed. "Nathan!" Her voice carried across the empty landscape, swallowed by the mountains. Another scream. Then another. Desperate, frantic. The sound of a wife in distress. She collapsed to her knees, her cries echoing through the trees. Help would come. Eventually. The rescue team arrived within the hour. Flashing lights cut through the thickening dusk, red and blue flickering against the towering trees. Paramedics, officers, and park rangers moved swiftly, their voices urgent but controlled. Emily was on her knees when they found her, trembling, her face streaked with tears. "Please," she sobbed, clutching onto the nearest officer's sleeve. "My husband, he fell. He just slipped. Oh God, please tell me he's okay." The officer, a grizzled man with tired eyes, crouched beside her, his voice gentle. "Ma'am, we're going to do everything we can. But I need you to stay calm. Can you tell me what happened?" Emily's breath hitched, and she wiped at her face, her hands shaking. "We were hiking. He was ahead of me, looking at the view. She choked on a sob, shaking her head. "He just lost his balance. I screamed for him, but her body shuddered violently. He fell before I could reach him." Her voice cracked at all the right moments. Her grief was raw, unfiltered. It was flawless. The officer gave her a sympathetic nod, patting her shoulder before moving toward the edge of the cliff, where the search team was already working to retrieve Nathan's body. Emily curled into herself, rocking slightly, her sobs muffled by the fabric of her jacket. She didn't look up when they carried Nathan's body up the slope. She didn't look when the paramedics checked for signs of life, even though she already knew there were none. She let out a heart-wrenching wail when they confirmed what was obvious. Nathan was dead. A tragic accident, one of many in these mountains. The officers didn't press too hard. People slipped on these trails all the time, and Emily's story made sense. No signs of a struggle. No immediate red flags. A terrible, unlucky fall. Emily was taken back to the town, wrapped in a blanket, offered water, comfort. They told her they'd need to do an autopsy. Just procedure, nothing to worry about. She nodded, still crying. "Of course. I understand." For the next few days, she played her part to perfection. She stayed at the cabin, avoiding reporters who had caught wind of the tragedy. She let herself be seen in town, red-eyed, exhausted. She thanked those who offered condolences with a shaky voice. She even visited the station voluntarily, asking if she needed to do anything else to help the investigation. No one suspected a thing. Until the autopsy came back. Multiple contusions. Expected. A fall like that would leave the body battered. Broken ribs. Skull fracture. Internal bleeding. All aligned with the assumed cause of death. But then something unexpected. 2 distinct handprints on Nathan's back. The kind of marks left behind by force. The kind of marks left by someone pushing. It was no longer just an accident. And suddenly, Emily was no longer just a grieving widow. The station was colder than she expected. The walls, a dull shade of gray, seemed to close in as Emily sat at the metal table, hands clasped in her lap. Across from her, Detective Harris flipped through a file, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming in, Emily," he said, offering a practiced smile. "We just need to go over a few details for the report. Standard procedure." Emily nodded, forcing a weak smile. "Of course. I want to help however I can." Harris exchanged a glance with his partner, Detective Miller, who leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Let's go back to that afternoon," Harris continued. "You said Nathan was ahead of you, right?" Emily nodded. "Yes. He was excited about the view. I was behind him." "And you saw him fall?" She swallowed hard. "Yes. He stepped too close to the edge, and he lost his footing." Harris nodded, jotting something down. "Did you try to grab him?" Emily hesitated. I reached for him, but it was too late. He went over." Silence settled between them. A long, weighted silence. Then Harris exhaled, closing the file in front of him. "Emily," he said, his voice softer now. The autopsy report came back. Something in her stomach twisted. "We found something unusual," Harris continued. "Both of your handprints. On Nathan's back." Emily's breath hitched. "Clear pressure marks," he went on. "Consistent with force. Not the kind left from trying to pull someone back, but the kind left from pushing." Emily stiffened. "No," she shook her head. I tried to grab him. Maybe that's what, Emily." His voice was firmer now. "The bruising tells a different story. It wasn't a desperate attempt to save him. It was deliberate." Miller, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. "There were no scratches on you. No defensive wounds. If you had been reaching for him, trying to hold on to him, there would be something." But there's nothing. Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. And there's something else, Harris said, tilting his head. You didn't call for help right away, did you? Emily's fingers clenched together. You waited. His eyes bore into her. How long, Emily? 5 minutes. 10. Longer. Her breath came shallow now. The walls felt closer. The air thinner. Why did you wait? Miller pressed. What were you thinking about? Emily opened her mouth, but her throat tightened. She could still see him, his body tumbling, the dull thud as he hit the rocks below. The silence afterward. The way she had just stood there, watching, feeling something close to relief. Her eyes burned. The room was too quiet now. The detectives weren't speaking. They were just waiting for her to break. And then she did. A sharp inhale, a slow exhale, and in a whisper barely audible, I did it. Emily stared at the table, her hands limp in her lap. The weight of her confession lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. Detective Harris and Detective Miller sat in silence, giving her space to speak. She wasn't sure where to begin. The truth wasn't a single moment. It was years of cracks forming, a slow unraveling. It wasn't always like this, she finally whispered. I loved Nathan. I really did. Her voice wavered, but she forced herself to continue. When we got married, we were happy. We talked about having kids one day, picking out names, imagining our future. I thought it would happen so easily. Everyone made it look so easy. She let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. But it didn't happen for us. Harris leaned forward slightly. You struggled to conceive? Emily nodded, a bitter smile on her lips. At first, we thought it was just bad timing. But months turned into years. We saw doctors, took tests, and the results, they weren't in our favor. She blinked, staring past them, lost in the memories. We tried everything. Diets, medications, even those ridiculous old wives' tales people swear by. I tracked every little detail of my body, hoping, begging, for something to change. Her voice broke, and she swallowed hard. But it never did. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Meanwhile, life moved on for everyone else. My friends got pregnant so effortlessly. Baby showers, first birthdays, tiny clothes, and sleepless nights. And I was always there, smiling, pretending to be happy for them. But inside, I was screaming. Her breath hitched as her fingers curled into fists. I started to resent Nathan. I know it wasn't fair, but I couldn't stop myself. Every time I saw a mother with her child, every time I heard a baby laugh, it felt like a knife to the gut. And every time Nathan told me we'd be okay, that we had each other, it felt like a lie. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to push back the tears. Because we weren't okay. I wasn't okay. Miller's voice was calm but firm. And so you convinced yourself that if Nathan was gone, things would change? Emily let out a shaky breath. I didn't plan it, not at first. But the thought crept in little by little. What if I wasn't tied to him anymore? What if I could start over, find someone else, someone who could give me what I wanted? Her lips trembled. It sounds insane now, but in my mind it made sense. It felt necessary. Silence settled in the room. The only sound was the distant hum of the fluorescent lights above them. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said the words that had haunted her for so long. I loved him, but I wanted a child more. The admission sat between them, raw and unfiltered. Emily closed her eyes, exhaling shakily, and now I have nothing. Emily sat on her prison cot, staring at the cold concrete walls. No mountains, no fresh air, just metal bars and endless time to think. During visiting hours, she watched other inmates cradle their babies, their tiny hands reaching for their mothers. The sight twisted a knife in her chest. She had killed for the dream of motherhood. Now she would never know it. No child would ever call her mother. That night, lying in her cell, she finally understood. She hadn't just lost Nathan. She had lost everything.